Welcome to Eyes on Books. My name's John Kelsall. This is my wonderful wife, Terry. We're here today with Eyes on Books, which is produced by the Video Club of Laguna Woods Village. And the book we're reviewing today is To Track a Traitor by Iona Winshaw. An interesting book, lots of pages to read. It's a mystery that weaves in and out of multiple mysteries all at the same time. What do you think?
Well, you were right about multiple mysteries. It has two characters, but the main character in the book is Lane Darling. And it follows her throughout all of the book.
All of the mysteries.
And I love mysteries. And all of the pages follow her through the many murders. Mm-hmm. And she's very good at solving murders. Mm-hmm. She is married to, I have to step back here, she's married to a detective, and Detective Darling. They live in British Columbia, newlyweds, and they seem to be so very happy and so very much in love, and nothing changes that throughout this entire book. Mm-hmm. But she's called away to Scotland because her grandfather has had a heart attack. Mm-hmm. And as newlyweds, she really feels bad about having to leave. But Detective Darling has his own job and he has things he has to do. So off to Scotland she goes. Meanwhile, Detective Darling has his own mysteries that he has to solve.
And he's called off to England.
Well, he has a murder he has to solve. And Lane, the wife, has her theories about the murder he's solving, but off to Scotland she goes. But she also knows that her sister is visiting her grandfather in Scotland. But it all intertwines. And
it seems that the whole Winslow family is entwined in
mystery.
Intrigue
And mystery. And you begin to find that out as you read on. But this book takes you to the present and it takes you to the past.
After World War II.
1948.
48.
So as Detective Darling is doing his work, he is suddenly called off that particular job, and he is sent off to England to solve a mystery there of a murder, another murder.
A guy goes off in a rowboat at night with a gun and doesn't come back.
Well, that was the murder in British Columbia.
Yeah.
But there's another murder that took place 30 years ago.
Oh, that's right. He went all the way back.
In 1948.
And he solves it.
So he has to go off to England to solve that murder, a 30-year-old murder. And who committed that murder? Meanwhile, his wife, Lane, is visiting her grandfather, but her sister, who is visiting, disappears. Where is her sister? So Lane leaves her grandfather, and off she goes to find her sister. And it builds, and it builds. And Lane starts looking for her sister. And her husband, meanwhile, in England, decides, well, maybe I'll visit with my wife. But now he can't find her. Where did she go? And this is really where it starts building. He wants to have a little vacation with his wife because They're newlyweds. And what's going on? So he starts looking for her, but he can't find her. But Lane used to be in, wow, how do I say this? She used to do work for the military. And she had a major who worked with her. So she went to her major friend and said, help me find my sister. And the major said, I can't. You're no longer working with us. She said, well, okay, I'm on my own. But then this wakes up a whole group of people who are alerted to Lane. And it really becomes very intriguing. And the grandfather and the grandmother up in Scotland are very aware of this whole life that's going on. This whole other life.
They lived it also.
They lived it also. And it's something, it's a story that you have to really get into. It's not an undemanding story as you read it.
Yeah, you have to stay with it.
You have to stay with it. And you have to stay with the back and the forth of the murders.
And it starts in the beginning and builds throughout the whole book, right up to the very end.
It does. And so there's the murder in British Columbia of present day. There's the 30-year-old murder that happened and who committed that murder. So it is so incredibly interesting. It's a long read, it's an intense read, and you really have to love a British read.
That's true.
Because
their style is unique.
The style is very, very unique. So I really want people to understand that this is a style that you have to love. You have to love mystery. You have to love intrigue. You have to really want to get into this and stick with it and love everything about it. And the ending will not disappoint in any way, shape, or form. Absolutely not. The author has an incredible mind, and she built and built and built the storyline.
And this is her 10th book, I understand, in a series all about Lane.
Yes.
As the protagonist.
Yes. She is the main character, and she gave Lane a brilliant mind.
Yes.
Being able to solve mysteries and sticking with things.
Yes. Good read.
Just an excellent read.
Okay.
So, how did you feel about the book?
I had to work to stay up with it and follow the intrigue and the back and forth and the ins and outs of the way multiple characters came in that were important characters. So you didn't have just one important character you were following all the way through other than Lane and Diane, her sister. So it was, like I said, from the beginning it keeps building and building and building right up to the end. So it's a perpetual evolution.
Well, I guess that our next step is we're going to be talking with the author.
Yes.
And asking questions.
Yes.
And we'll see where that leads.
Yes.
All right.
Welcome, Iona Woodshaw, the author of To Track a Traitor. You sent us on a mystery trip that was very intriguing, and we had to pay special attention to stay with it. But it was fun. What motivated you? Well, this is the 10th in a series of books with Lane as the protagonist, correct?
That is correct. It's number 10.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Were there more to follow after this book?
I'm sorry, was there one what?
Were there more to follow after this book?
Oh, yes.
With Lane?
Absolutely. I've got one coming out in May, and I've already done a second draft of one coming out in 2025.
Wow.
Wow.
And Lane is in all of those books?
Yes.
How did
Well,
you?
all of them. Lane, Darling, Ames, the gang.
The gang. How did you develop the characters, or how did you decide that those are the characters you wanted to use?
When I began writing the books 10 years ago,
Wow.
I didn't really have anything in mind at all. I just thought I'm going to retire from my job in 2 years and I'd better start writing. So I started to write about a woman who was very like my mother in many ways. And I placed her in the house that was my mother's favorite house. And I very quickly, almost within the first 100 words, completely diverged from things that were my mother, but kept the character very much. She's definitely inspired by my mother. And the house exists, and it existed as a house that I lived in when I was a very small child. So really, I didn't think about what kind of character she would be or anything like that. I just began to write about her, and she kind of revealed herself as we went along.
Wow.
Okay, I have to tell you, I fell in love with the detective and Lane as a couple.
Thank you.
I thought they were just absolutely charming. And I certainly hope they stay together for the future.
Yeah, it was the 1940s. I don't think people thought about divorcing so instantly as we do today. So I'm hopeful they'll stay together. I can't see any reason that they shouldn't, actually, because what they have is that they're both intelligent and they're very respectful of each other. And I think that's really good for the long term.
And I thought Lane had an absolutely brilliant mind. And I love the way she fed information back to her husband. She didn't step on his toes, but she was she was very respectful of his position, and she just gave him the information that she felt he needed to help him along with his position.
Thank you. What's interesting, I think, for me anyway, is that at the beginning, he was sort of dumbfounded by this, befuddled by this, and, made a great show of, could you please not find bodies and not interfere? But more and more, and I think it really turns the corner in this book, he kind of waits for her insights because, he's found them to be very useful. And I like that he's sort of, he really does take her seriously. And maybe it's because, as you said, she's not pushy about it.
Want to know is a little bit about you. You told us that you used your mother as inspiration, and you went back to your upbringing. But can you give us a little bit more background about you?
I was born very near where that house is, and I lived in that house until I was about 5. And then my father, who was a geologist, took a job in Mexico. So my mother dumped my poor brother in a private school here. He was about 9 or 10 years older than me. And we went to Mexico. So I spent a big middle chunk of my life, my early life, in Mexico. And then we moved to Arizona, and I kind of settled down, went to high school in Tucson, went to college in Ohio, and then came back to Canada. And during that time, I met someone and married in Eastern Europe, and had a child who is now 54 years old. It's shocking.
I'm looking at what is behind you, and it is absolutely,
intriguing.
It's so intriguing and fascinating. So I have to say, from what you just said about you, you have traveled, and did it have anything to do with how it affected your writing?
I think it must have. You know, I took a writing degree when I was 40, but I've always been an avid reader. I took a master's degree at our local university, and I really didn't do much in the way of writing except for poetry and a few short stories, and a very successful children's book, actually, during the time, because I was working as an educator. And then when I started writing, I just found all of these things, like really writing my grown-up books, as I think of them. I just found all of these things came in to it. Like, you know, Lane and Darling marry by about the 4th book in, and they go on a honeymoon to Tucson. And it was just such a treat to access all of that part of my, you know, of the landscape that I love growing up in Mexico, still there in Tucson, and all of those things. So they really did. And I noticed more and more as I go along, I just baldly take things from my childhood or stories I've heard from my parents, like Lane's father in the book, who's a fairly unpleasant sort of you know, wasn't very nice to her when she was growing up, is absolutely my grandfather. I never met him because he did die in 1943 as a result of his activities as a spy. But I just decided, what the heck? I mean, he's a very interesting character. And so I just began to take all kinds of things. And the spying that you see in South Africa in this book by Lane's sister is actually something more like what my mother did. She was involved in intelligence, but she was involved in South Africa, where she lived with my father at the beginning of the war. They came to Canada in 1947, I guess, just before I was born.
Wow. So the spying, or whatever you want to call it, is actually in your family?
It is very much so. I've always known my grandfather was a spy, and I learned maybe a couple of years or even a year before my mother died that she had also been involved, but in South Africa. You could have knocked me over with a feather, but I'm not surprised, because my mother, like Lane, stunning linguist, and as a young woman was absolutely stunning to look at and extremely intelligent. So it didn't really surprise me. What surprised me was learning maybe 4 years ago that my grandfather, whom my mother didn't like, so she didn't talk about him except to say unhappy things about him. She never talked about his family, but he had 3 brothers, and 2 of them also worked for MI6.
Wow.
And my grandfather actually spied First World War, prior to it, during it, and into the Second War, when he was finally caught and imprisoned and died in prison, effectively, by the occupying Nazis in Latvia.
Boy, that just brings more of the book to, what's the word I'm looking for?
This book is blooming. It is blooming on this table in front of me.
It is. It looks very shiny and
Well,
why?
that the story is blooming.
Well, when I was reading it, I was wondering if this was based on fact anywhere or real people. Diana, who is she?
Diana was modeled really on my mother's sister. She was younger than my mother. Now, Diana, I don't know anything about what she did during the war, so this is all made up. So I basically attached some of my mother's activities to Diana in the book. But she and my mother didn't get along at all from a very early age, and I think it all had to do with how things were in the family. You know, the father was very warm towards the younger sister, really liked her, and did not at all like my mother. So that may have created that tension. And you know, I met her a few times. She was in England when I was growing up in Canada. And I really wanted to use her because I'm very interested in this relationship with sisters. I don't have one myself. I have a couple of friends who are sisters who get along famously, and then a whole bunch who don't at all. And so I've been watching these dynamics with great interest for some time. So they all found their way into my book.
Wow, the book just took on a whole new flavor of and the fact it's almost an autobiography from what you're saying to a certain extent.
You could definitely trace some things. I don't know about autobiography. Like, people often ask me, how much is Lane like you? And I always protest that she was never modeled on me at all. But I think when you're writing, your worldview comes through. I mean, Elaine and I would get along in terms of our view about, you know, justice and kindness and all of those kinds of things. And in fact, I will say that it was always a mark of my family that on some level we didn't have very much in the way of, you know, generational dissonance. You know, I grew up in a family where we often agreed about things. And I talked to my son one time when he was quite young, and I said, do you feel a generational gap between yourself and your grandmother? And he said, no, not at all. So there is something about growing up with views you know, that gets into you. And I think a lot of how Lane sees the world is probably how I see it.
Wow. Wow. I'm blown away.
I'm speechless.
This is so cool.
This is absolutely amazing. I think this is one of the best interviews.
Yes, I have to agree too.
Oh,
really,
wow.
truly.
Gosh, I'm glad I could.
Well, the book is not only a production of your brilliant mind, it's also
Her life,
real.
part of her life.
You know, based on your life and your family's life, and if people don't buy this book and read it, they're crazy because
After this interview.
After this interview, you know, it's a given. You have to buy it, read it, and then try to figure out who's who, where, and how, and that would be the fun of it.
And I think the nice thing about the books, whichever one is coming out, is that you can always start there. This book, which you are celebrating today, I just found out yesterday was the #1 bestseller in British Columbia for 2023. So I was very excited about that.
Wow,
and
congratulations.
it meant that people were climbing onto the series wherever they happen to be. The first time they hear about a Lane Winslow book, they buy the latest one, and then maybe they get curious about, you know, how did Lane and Darling come to be married? You know, how did Lane come to that community? Because it's so isolated. You know, suddenly in 1946, she turns up there, you know. And so, yeah, I love it that people can come into this book and really enjoy it.
You can enjoy it on 2 levels. It's so cool. Wow.
How much research did you have to do about World War II, to be able to take us back to 1948 and 1946 when things were happening then?
That's a very excellent question, and it's sort of multifaceted. I'm going to start with the fact that our parents, I believe yours and mine, are from that generation. So you have this one connection. And my father was a bomber pilot for the Royal Air Force, he started out in the South African Air Force, though he was English, but pretty soon he was stationed in England along with lots and lots of other people from around the what you'd call the colonies. So I think I've learned over the years to collect a ton of information and then just use what is going to A, move the story along, but B, be true as I can make it. So there are some things where I'm just making stuff up, but where some of the details are, I tried to be really true to them. And in previous books, I've talked about the home children and a group of refugees who came here, German refugees who came here in 1939. And I wanted to get details about those things right because they have descendants who may read the book. And in fact, I've had indications that some have. And, you want to be respectfully right. So it's that combination of getting things right, not putting too much in, and using what you're getting to move the story. Does that make sense?
Wow. Leona, it's been an absolute delight on two levels. One, to read the book, and two, to speak with you and put the two together into a much more, like you said, blossomy atmosphere. But we just got the signal that we're out of time. So again, Thank you so much, number one, for writing the book and for taking the time to visit with us. It's been an absolute honor.
And sharing your story.
Oh, yes, absolutely. That just brought the book to a whole new level. So those of you who have not read the book yet, do so.
Thank you so very much. We
Thank you. It's
appreciate
been an absolute pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you for joining us for Eyes on Books, and we welcome you to come and join us again next month for another interview.
We thank you for tuning in to Eyes on Books. And if you have any books that you think might make an interesting discussion or authors who are good speakers, we'd love to hear your suggestions. Contact us at eyesonbooks@yahoo.com and keep watching.